So if you struggle with impulse control and you're feeling stressed and you want a way to self-soothe your brain, and you're in an environment where there's lots of opportunity to self-soothe that brain in lots of different ways that aren't necessarily helpful for you, boy, you've got to have real strong willpower to resist that and exist in that space in a healthy way.
What's up, guys? Happy Thursday. I'm so stoked about today's episode topic and guest. This is something I've wanted to cover for quite some time. Today's all about ADHD. We all know someone who's been diagnosed. Maybe we've been diagnosed ourselves. I was diagnosed in adulthood, and I still feel like I understand so little about how it affects me. But one thing I do know for sure is that under the right management system, it can be a superpower. And that's why I wanted to do this episode, because the link between ADHD and creativity is undeniable. And there's a lot of research out there about why that is, but the general consensus is that people with ADHD have enhanced divergent thinking. Now, divergent thinking is like this creative, unstructured way of problem solving that involves generating lots of solutions to a problem. So in producing music and making content, think about it. That trait is invaluable. You don't want to have linear thinking when you are making art. So today, my guest is Tristan Hunt. He's an ADHD coach with more than 20 years of experience in the music industry and working with DJs. He works with headlining artists all over the world to help them thrive with ADHD. And today we're getting into some of the systems and methods he uses with those clients so you can apply them to your own life. Guys, this episode is all about helping you understand yourself better. It's extremely validating. So please share with someone who can also benefit. I hope you enjoy. So my guest today is Tristan Hunt. You are a certified transformational coach specializing in ADHD, and you have more than 20 years in the music business. I'm so excited to talk to you because I know a lot of my personal friends will benefit from hearing this episode. So thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome, Olivia. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So I was doing some research yesterday, and I don't know if this is the most recent stat, but the one that I saw is that more than 366 million adults worldwide have been officially diagnosed with ADHD. That's according to the CDC. My question to you is, why DJs? Why are you a specialist in working with DJs?
That's a good question. As you mentioned, I spent over 20 years working in the music industry. I still work in the music industry, so attend conferences around the world. My clients are all based in that sector. I got diagnosed when I was 40 and spent sort of the previous 7 years working in the mental health space, talking at Miami Winter Music Conference, Amsterdam Dance Event, International Music Summit in Ibiza, all around the world on mental health, principally for the Association for Electronic Music, the global trade body for the genre, which is where I worked before doing what I do now. I led on a study there. It was the first study of its kind internationally to look at sort of neurodiversity within the electronic music industry, principally looking at North America, Europe, and Australasia. And although the data sample was reasonably small, it gave us a sort of, might be indicative of sort of like, to your point there, of how many neurodiverse people there are actually out there. And that we saw that sort of over 50% of respondents said that they had one or more neurodiverse conditions. So neurodiverse condition being something like ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, Tourette's. Why do we find these people, these groups of people with these neurodiverse conditions within the electronic music space? Well, they're probably drawn together by the sort of non-sequential thinking of the brain, the ability to put together lots of different disparate ideas into new ones, whether that's making a DJ set, it's actually sort of putting together a single or an album, sleeve work for some cover art for an album, whatever it might be. That this space lends itself to creativity. And so it's a sort of honeypot, perhaps, for creative minds to get drawn to.
I was going to ask, is there a correlation? Is there any research that indicates that people who have been diagnosed with ADHD might have a tendency towards creative careers? Does that link exist?
I think it absolutely does. I'm trying to think of any sort of hard data to support that. We know from the information that's out there that we tend to find a higher number of neurodivergent people working within the creative industries for the reasons I've just mentioned. This ability to think non-sequentially, which can be a real challenge for us if we're trying to do the day-to-day stuff, but actually to put together ideas is a massive strength, to be able to think non-sequentially in that way. So yeah, I think we notice a much higher number of neurodiverse individuals within the electronic music space than perhaps some other areas of work.
Yeah. So since you brought it up already, I want to talk about some of the advantages, and then we'll talk about the different ways in which it could potentially, negatively affect a career and how to mitigate those challenges. So because so many artists potentially have some sort of neurodivergent condition, is there strength in numbers in terms of collaboration in the music industry? If people have similar patterns of thinking, does that help when they're producing music? And can you talk me through some of the other advantages that having ADHD, lends itself to a music career?
It can be both a huge asset and also a stumbling block. So this idea to be in the studio collaborating with other neurodiverse individuals can be hugely empowering in terms of coming up with new work, but actually finishing that work can be a real challenge for people with ADHD. Very good at ideation, coming up with new concepts, but actually seeing them through to completion, that can be really difficult. And this is where we need a good team around us to help us get these things finished. So lots of the artists that I work with, who I'm sure your viewers, listeners would be really familiar with, headliners at Coachella and Glastonbury and places like that. That they have teams around them. They have people like myself working with them to help them with that process. So to see the idea actually to completion, so it actually gets released, that's often a huge challenge for people with ADHD. Certainly with people that have ADHD, understand other people's ADHD, to a large extent, much larger extent than neurotypical people would do. There's three types of ADHD. There's predominantly inattentive, which is actually the subtype that women tend to have. And again, this is not sort of particular to either sex. I have predominantly inattentive ADHD, which makes it hard to bring our attention to focus on a single thing. Hyperactive, which is a sort of archetypal naughty little boy bouncing around in class that gets all the attention, and then the combined type where you have the two together. So this is to say that, yes, people that have the condition can understand one another better, but then, of course, it can also be quite challenging. If you've got two people, both with ADHD, trying to complete a project, and neither one is really able to sort of put the structure in place to complete that thing, then that can be challenging. So very, very powerful and useful from an ideation point of view. But I'm not sure whether it's necessarily always advantageous in terms of actually getting work finished and released.
Right. Makes sense. So walk me through some of those challenges that your clients face and how it prevents them from getting what they want in the music industry.
Great question. I think there's a lot of frustration. So there's a lot of people out there that have a huge amount to offer and that they are unable to get that out, to get those ideas out, to engage with the wider world as they might like to. I think that can be a massive challenge for them, that they really need a lot of help and support often to do those things. We see within people that have ADHD, and this is sort of statistics from peer-reviewed neuroscience and science in general, that they have around about a 70 to 75% higher disposition towards addiction. So what we often see perhaps more of within the electronic music space, simply because of the environment that it is, where you can drink quite legitimately as part of work, and often drugs are there as well, and people turn a blind eye to that or ignore it because it's just part of that space. It's much harder to avoid temptation if you have a brain which is predisposed to addiction, where there's a lot of stress. Working in the music industry is a very high pressure environment. If you're a touring artist, a touring DJ, you're doing a lot of travel. We talk about this idea of transitions, moving from one place to another. It's very demanding on a brain that struggles with that sort of thing. So we have the ADHD brain. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition. It's highly hereditary. So we're born with this. And it means that we struggle with impulse control. So if you struggle with impulse control and you're feeling stressed and you want a way to self-soothe your brain, and you're in an environment where there's lots of opportunity to self-soothe that brain in lots of different ways that aren't necessarily helpful for you, boy, you've got to have real strong willpower to resist that and exist in that space in a healthy way. So that's probably sort of like one of the biggest challenges that people in that space will have, maintaining a sustainable career in a way that's healthy for them.
Wow, that's something I didn't even think about. The fact that those unhealthy habits, like drugs and alcohol, it's so insidious because they're so common in this environment and in this world. And I feel like I'm really late on reading this book, but I've been reading Atomic Habits. And one part of the book talks about how we tend to gravitate towards habits that are familiar to our environments, and that we follow the herd. And so that is already something that humans do naturally. Then you add in the layer of having ADHD, and that really creates the perfect storm to potentially get off track from your goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a fantastic book as well. If anyone's listening to this and hasn't read Atomic Habits, it's a book that's well worth their time. I can see by your smile that resonates. It's a great book. You said get off track. I think the thing is with a lot of these folk that they're not even on track in the first place, that there is no track, that this is just, it's a free for all. Most artists come from humble backgrounds or backgrounds where they've never had any experience with sort of the celebrity culture or the fandom that comes with, being a main stage artist. If you've got suddenly 20, 30,000 people appearing to see you, and you've got millions of Instagram followers, and this happens over quite a short period of time, and you have ADHD, okay, this is a highly, highly stimulating environment. And for people that have ADHD, we're constantly looking for stimulation. In order for us to feel safe and to be secure and successful in our lives, we want to put in structures and routines. A big part of the work that I do with artists is putting in routines that they want that are safe and helpful for them. But to do that requires quite a lot of effort. It's a difficult thing for them to do. So this idea that they might get off track in the first place, lots of them just aren't on track at all. They're just sort of going from one thing to another, one gig to another, one album or single release to another, just trying to get by and process all of these different sorts of things. So that we might say that when they have a structure, a routine that's effective for them, that enables them to tour successfully, that enables them to come back from touring to their, quiet house or flat and decompress and process that and then focus on the next piece of work that they might want to do in the studio. That does require a lot of work on their part to do that in a way that's effective.
When you say safe habits, explain what that means.
Safe habits, good question. It can mean a lot of things. So it can mean, we mentioned drink and drugs, so drink, drugs, sex, gambling, shopping, online buying, whatever it might be, any sort of dopaminergic activity, over phone use. We talk about sort of phone use often as a sort of, as a low level addictive behavior, where I work and have worked with some artists where their phone use is between 8 and 12 hours a day. So, I mean,
it's probably me. If I have to be honest, it's probably myself as well.
Well, that's really honest of you to say that, and this impacts a lot of people. This impacts a lot of people, not just those with ADHD. The smartphone is the devil incarnate, and I mean that in a joking way. Like, I have one, but I run it's sort of like pretty up to date iPhone, but I run it on grayscale mode, which was shown to me by somebody at a conference many years ago. So this glowing little box that's so enticing. When you run it on grayscale mode, which is just a setting within the iPhone, you pick it up. Suddenly it's less interesting. It's just a set of images. And then, your compulsion, this goes back to Atomic Habits, what you were saying earlier, your compulsion to use the thing to self-soothe, because that's what we're talking about. People with ADHD are using drink, drugs, phones, whatever it might be, to self-soothe. Their brains hurt, they're stuck, they feel in pain. So it's a self-soothing mechanism, which is all addiction is. Okay, so addiction is the brain's best guess at solving for pain. Okay, so the phones are ubiquitous. Obviously, they're with us the whole time. When we turn them onto grayscale mode, suddenly they become less interesting. We can put up various different blockers and stuff and things to limit our access.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, this is really impactful stuff. And again, it's very low friction. This takes like 2 or 3 minutes to set up, and then suddenly your phone use starts to decrease. And when we do that, we have much more capacity to do the things that we love and care for. The people, the creative work like you're doing. The bigger projects that you want to focus on. Those bigger projects, and any DJs, artists that are listening to this, going into the studio, if you've just spent the morning on your phone and sitting in front of Ableton or Logic to work on your latest release, is going to be a much harder process if you've been scrolling for the time before that. What we have, what neuroscientists call a dopamine trough. So if this is your dopamine level, going on your phone spikes up your dopamine. So suddenly we feel really good, or that the brain calms down. All of those other thoughts, that racy brain that we often have, the neurotypical people have it as well, I know, but especially with ADHD, the monkey mind, it quietens down. It's just focused on that next scroll, and you can feel the dopamine come. That kind of thing. But we do that, and although it feels good in the moment, we're burning through dopamine. We're making dopamine, but we're taking from this reserve that we have of this neurotransmitter. Dopamine is both a neurotransmitter and a neuromodulator. We spike it up on the phone, and then when we stop using the phone, we drop down. We don't go back to the same level we were before. We go into this thing called a dopamine trough. Okay, so we've got a little bit less dopamine than we had in the system beforehand. That's why we can sometimes find ourselves, right, I'm going to stop using my phone, put the phone down. Phone's back in the hand in like 5 seconds. We're scrolling again. Does that resonate from your experience?
Yes, 100%. And it's so difficult for a lot of DJs, a big topic of the show is how frustrating it is to have to constantly market yourself. And so you have to be online a lot. And so it's hard to set those boundaries sometimes. I feel like when the lines are blurred between what is me, marketing myself on social media versus what is mindless scrolling. And so I think that's what makes it so insidious as well. And I'm very interested. I did not know grayscale was an option. I've gotten really good over the past couple months to having my phone on Do Not Disturb almost at all times. First, it started just in the morning. I don't know if I have ADHD as well. So I don't know if I mentioned that in the beginning, but so
I wasn't sure I was aware of that. Okay, really interesting. And if I missed that, which I might have done, my apologies, but that's fascinating.
No, it's fine.
Your journey.
So putting my phone on Do Not Disturb in the morning was the first step that I took to not spiking my dopamine in the morning. Because, when I started my own business, I used to be a news reporter. And so the first thing I would have to do is check my phone, right? What's the latest news? What's going on? Did something tragic happen while I was sleeping? And so that was kind of my first step to protect myself. And then the Do Not Disturb period got longer and longer and longer to now it's almost on all day, and it's been great. But when I do have periods of time where I have some free time, exactly what you were saying, your monkey mind gets you to scroll endlessly, and then the Do Not Disturb thing doesn't matter. So I feel like that grayscale tip is probably that next step to making it even less interesting. So I love that tip.
I'm glad it resonates, and it's a one that's relatively as cost-free as well if you've got an iPhone. I think there's a version on Android also. And we can use things like Freedom app and Cold Turkey. So these are apps that we can set up to limit our access to the different apps and things that are on there. So if I may, Olivia, I could use you just we could do like a mini coaching session on this, that if artists and things are listening to it, they can use this for their own phone use.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, and it's really straightforward. So first off, no phone use for the first hour of the day. Okay, so we don't pick up our phone for that first hour of the day. And often, and I speak here as a recovering phone addict, that habitually my hand would shoot out from the side of the bed first thing in the morning, phone's in front of me, okay, within seconds. I even remember there was a stage when if I was waking up in the night, I was picking my phone up, I was checking it, so my phone use was back in the day really, really high. But then so was my cocaine and alcohol use as well. So there was some other things going on as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but the moment we start to give ourselves time at the start of the day, where we're not engaging with this thing, which is messing around with our dopamine circuits, we're already winning. We can activate grayscale. That's great. We can take off all of the apps. So, for example, I haven't, and this is what I encourage the artists and folk that I work with to do. I haven't had like Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. I don't use TikTok myself, but none of those live on my phone. I have to download them each and every time I want to access them. Okay.
Oh my God.
And so, and this is very much from Atomic Habits. He talks about this in that book, that we want to put friction in between us and the things we don't want to do, and reduce that friction, make it easier between us and the things we do want to do. So again, the mindless scrolling, the self-soothing starts to be minimized when we pick the phone up and first it's on grayscale. I was okay. Well, I still want to access Instagram. Where's Instagram? It's not on there. What am I doing picking my phone up? Was this an intentional act because I need to post about the show that I'm performing at this weekend? Or was I just picking it up to self-soothe? Now I can go and download, of course, off my Wi-Fi in like 30 seconds, Instagram, and log back in. But do I really want to do that? Is that the best use of my time right now? So again, we're just putting in like little barriers, little bits of resistance there that help us to trigger our mind in a positive way to reflect on the action we're about to do. Is this action for my best self, or is this just me self-soothing? Does that resonate?
It does. And it's really surprising how little friction is needed to stop you from doing something. Because the thought of having to download an app every time I want to use it, I think I've already given up, and I haven't even tried it yet.
It's a pain in the ass, isn't it? Pain in the butt, as you turn in the States. That suddenly that bit of friction, it's just annoying. So actually, it's the right kind of annoyance because it's preventing us from doing the thing we don't actually want to do. What we want to do, perhaps for yourself, what you'd like to work on, the content that you're putting up in terms of like scripting for these calls, if you're using a script, working on your marketing, your branding, all of these sorts of things. And for an artist, a DJ, maybe they're wanting to get into their door, open up Logic, get into Ableton, work on that next track. That in Recordbox, mapping out what their set might look like, the different track options they've got for the upcoming show. That they don't really want to be. We don't really want to be locked into our phones, scrolling away. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily the best use of our time.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing advice. So I have to ask because, I think that there's still some stigma around coaching in general, or maybe people who don't understand where a coach fits in because they see this, binary of doctor, patient, and that's it. People who are there's still, I feel like, a one-track mind with a lot of things. I work, I do branding for a lot of different coaches, right? And I feel like they experience that barrier themselves, trying to explain their value and kind of where they fit in on a team. So what do you say to people who may not understand the value of someone like yourself and who just assume that artists can fix, I'm using fix in air quotes for people who are just listening, fix their problems with medication and medication only?
We say pills aren't skills. Pills aren't skills. This idea that the pharmacological response to ADHD is the most effective of the first line response, stimulant response. There's two different types of ADHD stimulant medication, but that first line response is the most effective of any mental health medication out there. Okay, and I take dexamphetamine myself. The closest proximity, I think, in the States might be something like Adderall. I think, I'm not quite sure on that, so please don't. If people are listening to this, double check that out. But they are incredibly effective if they are dosed correctly and you work with a clinician that is specialist in ADHD. The sort of pharmacological response can be life-changing for people with ADHD. So I'm highlighting that point. Can be very, very helpful. It doesn't work for everybody. The data that's out there says that it's effective for 75 to 85% of people, but still that's way higher than any other medication out there in terms of mental health. So there's that. But that alone doesn't give us the structure by which to have a successful life. pills aren't skills. The pills fuel us to do the thing better that we want to do, concentrate more, have more focus and attention for the thing we choose to put our attention onto. But they don't provide the structure in which to do that. So if you're an artist and you're used to waking up at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, maybe even into the afternoon, and you're just sort of picking your phone up and you're going about your day, doing whatever you want to go and do as it comes up, you're very much in your impulses, just moving from one impulse to another. And even if you've got like a sort of, some of the bigger level artists that I work with, they have a day-to-day, so they've got an assistant with them the whole time. They've got managers, they've got international management teams, depending on which area they're in, full record label, publishing. There's a massive team that sits around some of these individuals. But that can create an environment where they really can do anything they want to go and do, because they'll be supported in different ways to do those things. They in some ways need to be even stricter and more disciplined with themselves, because that framework is artificial, that can go. So without that framework, then what do you do? So much better that we build this up ourselves, even if we've got the resources to not have to do these things. I'm doing air quotes now if I have to. We choose to. With ADHD, we don't use the words should, must, or have to. Should, must, or have to. The verbiage is really important, because if it feels confining or restraining, I'd be curious to know your view on this as someone with ADHD. But if that thing, even if you know it's the best thing in the world for you, if you feel like you have to do it, you'll probably find yourself pushing back against it and throwing it out and not doing it. Does that resonate?
100%. I always say, the famous Star Wars quote, only Siths deal in absolutes.
Right. Yeah.
I do not, I'm a big proponent of I live a low alcohol lifestyle, I call it, because I don't feel like, full sobriety is necessarily the best route for everybody. I think that there's just so many shades of gray. And I think that absolutism in that language is not conducive to success for so many people, not just artists, but everybody. So yes, I agree. That sort of language is a major turnoff. It makes me want to do the exact opposite of whatever the thing is that someone's telling me to do.
You, if I'm hearing you right, perhaps give yourself permission to drink, but that you are elective about it. You're considering it. Do I want to drink today? How am I feeling?
Yes.
Maybe I won't. This is a great event. I'm really enjoying this dinner. It doesn't need any alcohol. But
is it worth it? Is it a great bottle of wine that someone is opening for me special, or is it a White Claw, that was in the back of the fridge for 6 months? I really think about those details now, and it's actually such an amazing intentional way to live.
That's a huge shift as well, isn't it? To be in that intentional space. We know that alcohol is neurotoxic. So, if we're going to drink something, that's really nice, fine, that's an experience. It's very nice to drink a fine glass of wine or champagne or whatever it might be if we like drinking. But if not, do we want to do that damage to the brain? What's going to be the effect afterwards? We know that for the ADHD brain, that it's going to often make our ADHD symptoms worse. I don't know if that's that resonates with your account.
1,000,000%.
Yeah, we've got, every human being has something called the task positive network. So if I'm using a pen here to sort of I'm not sort of doing left, right brain hemispheres, but pointing one direction. We've got task positive networks. It's a set of brain regions that are all about here and now, goal orientated thinking. So your DJ artist might go into the studio, open up Ableton, right, I'm here making my track. Brilliant. Okay. Task positive networks are activated. But then maybe they get a loop wrong, they put a new plugin in and it can't really work. And then they start to get frustrated about it. And then the snare that they made breaks and they start to get really agitated about the music they're making. And they start to question, they've gone from being in a task positive network, here and now, goal-orientated focused thinking, to this ruminatory space, something called the default mode network. So that nothing inherently wrong with the default mode network. It's where we go when we're not in the task positive network. It's where scientists think we have our conceptual sense of self. We think about past and future. And it's where a lot of the creative ideation comes from as well. So this is default mode networks. It's all good, apart from if you've got ADHD, where if you make a mistake now, everything's fine. But then you go into this default mode network space where suddenly you start to spiral. Now you're ruminating. What am I doing in the studio? I've got no right to be here. Who do I think I am as an artist? Imposter syndrome's coming up. But no, you try and bring yourself back to Ableton to work on that thing. You can't quite bring your attention to focus back on that part of the music you're working on, because you're going back over here, chastising, self-flagellating yourself for this failure, this mistake that you've made, and all of this can happen very, very quickly. And I mention this because if we're hungover, the pen, if you like, that if people were watching this and just sort of moving a pen to the left and right of my head. It's a switch, if you like, and I'm sort of oversimplifying the neuroscience here. But the switch between being in the task positive network, Olivia's focused on this thing, doing this thing in here and now, it's all fine, or you make a little mistake or whatever as we do, that's okay, I'm back to doing that thing. That switch is much weaker when we've been drinking and we're hungover. Then we go into the default mode network, and then we're like, what am I doing being an interviewer or in this space? I've got no right on all that. Does that resonate, that sort of experience?
I thought about you're explaining this. It reminded me of this time 2 years ago. My husband and I just went to see Fatboy Slim for the 100th time, and we just ended up having a little too much fun that night. And it was great. I have no regrets. But I remember the next day, I was trying to respond to an email that I was an opportunity I was really excited about, and I could not get this email out. And I've written a bajillion emails in my lifetime. I think I'm great at emails, but I couldn't get it out because of the hangover. And what it brought up for me was everything you're just saying, the imposter syndrome. It was for like a content creator, an influencer brand deal. And I was like, wow, who do I think I am? Like, I really think I'm this big shot influencer, just self-flagellated, like you're saying. The negative self-talk was insane. And then I took a step back and I said, I need to respond to this email tomorrow. Today, it's just not going to happen. And then the next day, it came out of my fingertips like it was no big deal. And it's just crazy how I don't think a lot of people who don't face these issues understand the spiral that it can create in such a short amount of time.
That's right. It can happen in split seconds, and the neurotypical people, like you described there for yourself, brilliantly, and it's such a great example. I've had that same experience myself. That for neurotypical people, it's very hard to comprehend that you might be fine one moment, and Tom, Dave, Mary, whoever is around you at the time, like, Olivia's cool, everything's fine. And then suddenly you can go into a space where everything's a disaster. We talk about this in terms of catastrophic thinking. So that in this ruminatory space, this default mode network space, this is where we'll go into catastrophic thinking. Who am I to be advising this influencing brand about my expertise when, I can't even write an email, whatever else it might be that's coming up. I'm going to lose my career. Imagine if I sent this email now and they saw it, I'd be laughed at. The catastrophic thinking can suddenly escalate really quickly.
100%. And I can imagine how potentially dangerous this is for artists when your work, when you're DJing, relies on the immediate feedback of the crowd in front of you. And if you perceive that they're not dancing as much as you want them to, or, smiling or whatever it is, or the opposite, it's going super well, that's got to be so stimulating and so rewarding. And it's like two very extreme ends of the spectrum.
Absolutely. And it's a really great example that you bring up there. I had an artist recently, 10,000 capacity arena, so like a fairly decent sized space, and it wasn't quite full. Maybe it was like a sort of 7,000-8,000 cap, something like that. But to most, it's busy, right? This is a vibey, busy space. But the artists focused on that, and they came away and they turned around to their TM, to their tour manager, and excuse my language, they were like, "Well, that was a fucking disaster, wasn't it?" And the tour manager was like, how was that a disaster? You just killed it. Like, people were cheering your name, the crowd's going crazy. Yeah, but it wasn't full, was it? The people didn't turn up. They've gone elsewhere. They didn't like me. And suddenly that sense of imposter syndrome comes back up again, the recriminations, the self-flagellation, the attack. The us folk with ADHD, unfortunately, and this is, for artists who are often even more sensitive. It's part of what can make them so good at their craft. Our neurobiology is different to other people's. That's to say that our nervous system is wired. We're fundamentally wired differently to other people. So touch, taste, sight, sound, smell, feeling, emotion is much, much more heightened in us. And so that because we do this sort of like this switch that I mentioned that can be made looser with alcohol use or whatever else, this is loose anyway. This ADHD medication is helping us to stay in the task positive network. That's what stimulant medication does. But obviously for the artist that came off stage the other day, they went straight from task positive, I've been performing, into default mode. I'm catastrophizing. There was only 7,500, 8,000 people this time. There'll only be 5 next time. It's just going down. I might as well quit. That was what was going through their mind.
And I can imagine that people who might not understand, and I think this is why these conversations are so important, the education component, because people who, are not neurodivergent, they're neurotypical, they might see that as, well, why you're ungrateful? Why are you being so ungrateful? You just had this amazing opportunity. And they're not understanding that it's something that is just hardwired for them to have that reaction. And so it's really important for people to understand that this might be coming from a place that is just, it's just innate. They can't control it. Or they can, but with your help, they can work on controlling it. And so that's what I was going to ask. When you have a client on board with you, obviously everybody is different. Everybody has, different things they want to accomplish and different routines, and how they navigate through their artistry. What do you do from day one when you have somebody who wants to work with you? What are the steps ahead?
Firstly, the compassion that you just shared there, highlighting that, be kind to ourselves, that as the artist that's come off stage, that's had this experience, this is profound for them. This is a real experience. They're not being a prima donna. This is something that's really impacted them, and they're really feeling this. They really, really, really feel these things. So for those people that have ADHD and that go through this, be kind to yourself when this comes up, because it obviously does and will come up. But it's then about putting in a team and structure around yourself. And if you're an individual artist, somebody that's just starting out in the industry, that doesn't have a team or anyone around them, perhaps, that this is about then finding resources, whether it's coming to see someone like me, or there's lots of different ADHD coaches out there, looking at Attitude magazine. If maybe we can pop this into the show notes if possible, but Attitude magazine is the world's leading magazine on ADHD, freely available online, heaps of great resources in there, which will dive into loads of the detail that we're talking about here. But that person needs to put in place a framework that's going to keep them safe. And maybe you can just remind me of the question, because I've lost my own thread there. I'm coming to it. It's the end of the day here in London, and I've just done 5 pages. And my brain is starting to seize a bit, I'm afraid.
No problem. It's the beginning of my day, and I usually am not fully, wound up until like 10 a.m. I get up early, but yeah, so we're experiencing kind of the same problem in different world hemispheres. So when somebody comes on to work with you, obviously everybody is different. So you said the first step is kind of compassion. Walk me through the actual logistics. Are there intake forms? How do you develop a plan for your clients that not only you work through together, but then they can be empowered to integrate individually without your help long term?
Okay, so we start off with a discovery call. It's a 30-minute call to see what their goals and challenges are. If we connect and I feel I can help them and they'd like to do some work together, then we'll do some work together. And then we're looking at sort of awareness and understanding, the kind of things you and I are talking about today. Understanding sort of like, so I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist or any of those things, but I try and sort of make as much of my work based upon the prevailing neuroscience as possible. Because it's kind of like if you're driving a car and you really understand how the engine works, and something, car starts to stutter, you're far more likely to be able to understand and solve for that. And it's the same with ADHD. If we understand our neurobiology, how our brains work, how our brains tick, that we have an impairment of something called the prefrontal cortex, the PFC, this front part of the brain. And if I'm pointing towards the sort of my forehead, if you like, it just sort of sits behind there. And the impairment there is around something called executive functions. This is a psychological term, executive function. So planning, time management, organization, execution, all of these things. We have an impairment of working memory. All of these bits together make doing the day-to-day bits of life pretty tricky. And if you are an artist that wants to tour and go places and see people and book meetings and things, well, it's incredibly challenging. So I'm helping people to understand their ADHD. Are they predominantly inattentive, predominantly hyperactive, combined type? How's it showing up for them? What's their life experience? Is this a later stage diagnosis? And many of the people I work with are being diagnosed later in life. Do you have a diagnosis yet? A third of my clients are pre-diagnosis. And then working with a range of different clinicians, I work with some really quite incredible world-leading figures in terms of doctors and clinicians, psychotherapists, who do that work. I'm very boundaried in terms of how I work, and we'll bring in people. Sometimes there's a whole team of addiction specialists, psychotherapists, clinicians, if medication is perhaps needed as well. That the client is saying to me, yes, I would like that. Now that I understand more about how my brain works and the struggles I've got, I'd like to bring this person in. So it's client-driven, very elective. I'm never telling the person what to do for the reasons we mentioned earlier. If it feels confining or forced, we won't do it, of course. So helping the person by asking them questions to find their own way to the solutions they need.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think it's so that the value of coaching cannot be overstated, because I think we're living in this age where there's so much of information available online, but it's generalized advice. How do you know that something's going to apply to you? Number one, like you said, the different types of ADHD. So a lot of people don't even know, what particular flavor that they have. And so when you're looking up advice online, I think about this with health content in general all the time, like physical health content. Something that applies, to one group does not necessarily apply to the whole. And so it's so valuable to have someone there as, your advocate to help you sort out what you need to do long term. So this has been really an incredible conversation. I could take up a lot more of your time, but I won't do that. So why don't you let my audience know where they can find you if they're interested in coaching?
Sure, thank you, Olivia. So I'm Tristan Hunt UK on Instagram, Tristan Hunt on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, but I don't really use it too much. And my website is tristanhunt.co.uk.
And just know that if you want to reach out to Tristan via Instagram, he's going to have to download the app first to respond.
I will have to download it, and I'm not generally using it Monday to Friday. So I'm only going on socials, apart from LinkedIn, at weekends. So I'm not using socials generally through the week. So there might be a little bit of a delay, but I will get back to you.
Amazing. Well, it's great. You lead by example, and that's very important.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, so I did try that grayscale thing on my phone right after I hopped off the horn with Tristan. I tried it for like an hour, and I got so excited about it that I posted a thread sharing a screenshot. And then I realized hours later, after I took my phone off Do Not Disturb, that even though my phone was in grayscale, the screenshot was not. It was one of the dumbest things I've ever done, but I was cracking up. And, I was just excited about it. And so I wanted to share. But anyway, I definitely recommend giving that trick a go. And if you dare, deleting apps from your phone. I have not gotten to that point yet, but maybe I will someday. By the way, we have an entire panel on mental health at Chicago Music Nexus this year. And tickets are moving fast, guys. This is a great opportunity to learn from people who make careers go boom. Mental health is such an important component of your artist journey, so having a panel from experts was very important to us. Tickets are linked in my show notes, so go grab yours before they're gone. I'll see you at Chicago Music Nexus, and as always, I will talk to you next week.